and it's a pleasure to be here. It's always good to sit in the same room with a lot of people that put time in on local government and state government and know some of the tough issues that we're addressing in the legislature. Real quickly, I've got two state representatives following me, so I'm not going to try to take up all the air in the room, but do want to highlight just some a few things that are coming up in the 2020 session. We are both caucuses, the House and the Senate are both having their caucus retreats this week. We're all leaving this evening, Thursday and Friday. And if you're not familiar with what that is that's where we all get in a room and yell at each other and we decide what who's going to carry what bill and what our main objectives are going to be. But usually it's all the yelling and screaming is surrounded by a little bit of downtime and time to hang out with everybody and get to know them. And that's an important thing when you spend that much time with your fellow legislators. You need to know who they are and what makes them up personally. So, but during this next couple of days, we will be talking about many of the issues that you know are already at the forefront of state government. Pensions, how are we going to deal with pensions? Are we going to address structural changes in TRS? Are we going to fund pensions at the level that we funded in the past? As you're well aware, we put in almost $4 billion extra into pensions over the last 4 years, and that may or may not be able to continue. Other things that we'll be discussing: criminal justice reform, which includes things that judges here are used to hearing, jail overcrowding, bail reform, and just the total cost of incarceration. We've just opened a new state prison in eastern Kentucky at the tune of about $17 million a year to run. So that's an expensive ordeal there. And that's really just to alleviate inmates sleeping on the floor. It's a tremendous issue and a tremendous struggle for many of our local jailers and local governments. Medicaid costs, this is something you hadn't heard a lot about in the last couple of years because of the workforce going up. We're taking more people off Medicaid rolls, but we're seeing huge increases in Medicaid costs when you look out over the next 2 to 3 years, mainly dealing with there's one thing that is mainly dealing with. We have a lawsuit that was finally settled that requires the state to pay rural hospitals $142 million a year for the next 3 years. That's going to be considered a Medicaid cost. Also, just the increased contributions as federal government contribution in Medicaid drops this year and next year. We have to continue to put more state dollars into that program. And then also just the idea of with the new governor coming in, what is his idea going to be on the waiver, on Medicaid waiver? We've heard him publicly say that he will discontinue trying to push for the federal waiver, which means that the additional Medicaid recipients that have been added to the rolls are going to stay there for the next several years unless we do something in the legislature. A couple other things that we'll be looking at: education funding, road fund modernization, tax reform, and just preparing the workforce. I like what Dr. Warren was talking about. We obviously see that we've got to educate our college is changing, and we've got to educate more toward careers, more toward multi-discipline facets of education. And I think we're doing a good job in Henderson, and I think the overall technical and community colleges are moving that way very rapidly. And then finally, just a couple of hot item topics that tend to take up the news and end up on headlines of your local newspaper or on social media. Vaping, what to do with vaping? Regulate it, tax it, both. What are we doing there? Sports wagering, expanded gaming. It's funny, we were just sitting here talking, hadn't heard the governor talk much about expanded gaming in the last month or so, but I'm sure that that's going to be something that's brought up. And then finally, medical marijuana, how are we going to deal with that in our states? So those are always the controversial issues, but the nuts and bolts of funding education, pension reform and criminal justice reform are the big ticket items that we're going to be looking at during this budget session. So with that, I'll sit down and you can hear the views from the House and see what they're thinking, but they're probably thinking right along the same lines. So it's a privilege to serve you and be a representative for our communities. I have 3 counties in the Grad area that I represent, as well as Caldwell, Crittenden, and Livingston County as well. So thank you so much for your service, and thank you for giving me time.
I know Representative Lewis is thinking, why does she get to go before me?
No, I'm glad.
But he's probably happy. I was going to say, by the time Robbie did go down quite a bit of the list of things, it was quite a surprise. It was quite a surprise that I was speaking today, other than just an update. But anyway, a lot of the things, he is correct. We are the majority of both the House and the Senate are getting ready to have their retreats. So we will be spending a lot of time of hashing out things behind closed doors, hopefully, and so that we can all come out smiling and move forward in a very positive way come January. That is the whole purpose of a lot of the work that, as you all well know, that take place in all your different agencies. I want to congratulate Chitin and also Judge Mattingly. I know they spoke recently with Connect Grad, so thank you all for that work on that. One item that Robbie did not bring up was Kentucky Wired. It does seem to continue to surface again and again and need to be fed more money on a regular basis. So that is one item that we'll be looking at to see exactly where we go forward with that. The most important thing that we have going into this session most definitely is the budget. The numbers have already been in a memo. I know we all received a memo of how much a shortfall that we're going into it. And that is prior to a lot of the promises that were made in the inauguration speech yesterday. So I'm not sure exactly where all that money is going to come from, and I don't know how much Santa Claus has, to be honest with you, that he can share with us prior to going into session. Because the reality is the funding is not there to provide everything that we think that is necessary and is important. And every item that we have down the list, I can assure you, every item is important. Paying the pensions has been a very, very important priority for all 3 of the ones you see here in front of you at the state level. That's been, and education for that matter, has been a top priority for the 3 of us that have been up here and the other legislators from this area. I don't really have any golden crystal ball at this point. We've got several pieces of legislation that have already been pre-filed, and Senator Mills already referenced it. A lot of times we'll have a lot of the work that's being taken place is not necessarily what the headlines are and things like that. We'll have a lot of things that are really going to suck the air out of the room on the work that's actually being taken place. I do think the medical marijuana and recreational marijuana will be something that will take up a tremendous amount of time. We've got a lot of gun bills that have already been filed, whether they be red flag bills, different things like that. I think those are some of the items that are going to be something you're going to hear a lot about. But as far as the work that is going to be taking place, we're just trying really hard to stay focused on the budget and making sure that we are paying our bills as far as going forward and making sure that we are accessible for you all, because you all are going to have to let us know on a lot of different items coming up of what's important to you all and where we can give and take a little bit. I know that especially for our area, the 100% back to the coal counties was a commitment from both, not only the governor elect, but also the previous governor. So that's roughly $24 million that we're going to have to figure out at the state level where that money comes from, so that that money can go back into the counties. And I know that was a commitment that was made on both, but that's also a commitment that we're going to have to try to figure out where that money comes from. I see Denitra with us today, and infrastructure continues to be a #1 top priority, and I know it is especially for our mayors and judges whenever they look at the roads. And I mean, the transportation is one of the main things that I think government needs to make sure they provide to enable all of the access that we have on that. So thank you all very much for allowing me to be here with you all today. Does anyone have any questions for any of us?
Suzanne, would you 2 minutes talking about the task force?
The task force?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, we did a task force based upon the ad districts. The ad districts are 50 years old. Not all of the employees of the ads have been there for 50 years, as you can look around and see a lot of our young ones that are here. But the task force, we did an evaluation of mainly bringing together information to give a lot of background of what the ads do, what their process is. And one of the main things that ads is the most important, and I know you all see it on a daily basis, is the access to federal funding. And it's a kind of the vehicle a lot of times to get money where it needs to go. So the recommendation upon the task force was to provide the information to the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate. And I think that you will possibly see legislation that may come forward of some suggestions. There was a lot of interest in asking the ad directors and all people involved, for that matter, from all the different agencies that were involved in it, to make suggestions of how can we make the ads, sustainable and in a really good place for the next 50 years. Anytime anything's 50 years old, you really need to look at it and kind of regroup and see how you need to repurpose to make sure that we are providing the absolute best services that we can through those avenues. So the recommendation, more or less, was the information provided. It was a fact finding, so that there was a lot of things that I learned. I think all of us learned things with that task force that we had no idea that existed out there. And so hopefully that information going forward, more than likely that would travel through state government or local government, would be the avenues for the chairmans. I've submitted the information to them so they would be aware of it, and also provided them the recommendations from not only the ad directors but anyone else that had suggestions of how to look at to see where we need to go next with the ads. So does that kind of give you an idea on that? All right. Any questions? Well, thank you all very much for having us today. Please have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. If there's anything we can do for you all, please let us know. But also, any legislation that's coming up, if there's questions about it, please contact us and let us know. I would prefer you contact us and ask the question than to go out on social media or something like that of just kind of all over the place. Because I will tell you, we see a lot of that going into session. And if we can kind of get focused back to helping our constituents and taking good care of people, that's where we want to be at. Thank you.
Well, again, I get to go last, and there's not a whole lot they didn't touch on, so I'll try to touch on a few things that that maybe interest you all that maybe they didn't mention. But they mentioned pensions, and we talk about CERS and KRS and some of the problems that we have there, and Mr. Austin keeps me pretty up to date on his feelings on things on that issue, but he's got some great points. CERS is forced to invest their money safer because of the condition of KRS, and therefore the return is 5%, is an average of 5% over the last few years, whereas a system like TRS, their average rate of return over the last 30 years has been 8.5%. And they can do that because their system is a little more stable with cash and so forth. So that's one issue I think we do need to try to address. I don't know how, there's been talk about pulling the system away and so forth. So I don't know the answer to that, but it is a big problem. The CERS is being penalized for the shape of KRS, which, is not a good thing. And, nobody's going to watch your money like you do. So, if you've got all your members in the CERS system that are sort of overseeing that, they're going to take a little extra look into things that are going on. So that is an issue, and I think we're all aware of that. And it makes sense, Our worst systems, KRS, our CERS, TRS, and all that are in better shape, 54%, 60% funded, which is not great. But also in the state of Kentucky, at any one time, you're not going to need 100% of your assets either. It's not like you're in private business where you're going to sell your company or whatever and have to liquidate. So those are very important issues, and I hope we take a deeper look into some ways to fix that problem. One of the committees I serve on, Health and Family Services, I've been really pleased in the work that's coming out of there, and it has to do with pharmacy prices, maybe capping insulin costs at $100 or something like that. Looking at how the middleman for Medicare or Medicaid is reimbursing smaller pharmacies. They're reimbursing them at a rate that they can barely survive, but yet that company's profiting millions and millions of dollars off that contract. So just some things like that, maybe to address some of those issues. Those are two big issues that I think will affect all of us over the next few years. Infrastructure, we always talk about infrastructure, and every time I call the engineer, she assures me we're doing all the road projects for everybody. Isn't that right? She's gonna kill me, but anyway, and she's very good for our area. I will say this: she's always been, Johnny on the spot anytime we call her. So we do appreciate your hard work in this area. It's really been a pleasure for me to be able to get to know you and work with you on that issue. But we've got a tough budget, as both of these have mentioned, and I think we're all conservative up here, and we only have so much money to go around, and we've got a lot of needs, and I know we're going to do our best to try to address those. And another topic I wanted to mention, and you all brought it up to me several times, is about local control and maybe giving you all some more flexibility. And I'm all for that. I think you all know your needs better than we do sitting up there, and each county and each city is different. And you should have that flexibility to, if your community wants to put a tax for something and you put it on there and all your people are supportive of that, you should be able to do that. And because you know what you need in your community. So if I can help in that way, I'd be glad to do that, because I think that's important. On that note, I'll open it up to any questions, and if not, Merry Christmas. It's been a pleasure. Thank you all for having me. It's a pleasure working for the people in our communities, and I know you have tough jobs. Mayor Paul shared with me something last night. We ran into each other. He was telling me about something that happened there in the city of Beaver Dam, and it just reminds me you can't please everybody. So you just got to do the best you can do. And here's another point too, I think, and this is more important than ever, I think. We have to do what's right. Sometimes it's not the Republican way or the Democratic way, but just do what's right. So, thank you.